But first, I want to welcome Mike Golic Jr., who has been gracious enough to get up early and join us in this class. I always say, Mike, that I love to get guests in here who are doing what so many of our students in this class want to do or already have. Some of them already have podcasts. Some of them already are kind of going down that road in their profession. But I mean, Mike, you are doing what so many of our student athletes in this class have done and want to do in the future when they graduate. So as we get started, I would love for you to kind of start, as I always say, at the beginning. I mean, this was your major, so it had to be in the back of your mind that yes, you wanted to follow this path into broadcasting. And so talk about how you got involved in it to begin with and where your interest came from.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you guys let me come in here and chat today. So yeah, absolutely right. My interest in this went back a long way. For people that may not be familiar, my father, Mike Golic Sr., was a part of a 2 decade long running morning sports talk radio show at ESPN called Mike and Mike in the Morning. And he played 9 years in the NFL, but for me growing up, that was the bulk of my life. I knew him as a broadcaster. He retired when I was 3 years old, and so I grew up, with sports talk radio on in the background, with him calling college football games during the time I was a kid, and getting to travel around and see some of that firsthand growing up. That was when I kind of clicked for me, middle school, high school, where I realized, hey, I like to talk a lot. I love being around sports, and I saw firsthand, his experience with it, the people he met, the places that it took him, and how it kept him close to the game. And so yeah, coming to Notre Dame, I knew that was something I wanted to be involved in. I was an FTT major, so I had, some formal introduction to that. But a lot of it for me also, I got really lucky when I got on campus. I was a football player from 2008 to 2012 on campus. And we were there in like the beginnings, the burgeoning, YouTube, a lot of early social media. Twitter really came online when I was in college. And that created an extra avenue for contact with fans. And so myself and one of my teammates, Brandon Newman, who now, funny enough, works in sports media. He and I have worked together at different stops now. But we started doing a lot of the behind the scenes content for Notre Dame football. So tours of the Goog, taking people on the road with us, going behind the scenes on certain things that we had done in the locker room, and just taking people in and doing, I think at the base level, what I was always told, again, my dad was the groundwork for a lot of this, which was it was enjoyable to take people where they couldn't otherwise go. And based on your guys' experience, you all have the opportunity to do that. So I went through Notre Dame with that in mind. Between doing a lot of stuff with that, with the football program I was lucky to do. My fifth year, I did an internship with Notre Dame summer camps where I did the in-house content for the website for parents, which, let me tell you, you want good practice interviewing, you have to go out and interview kids at camp during the course of the day. Never knowing what they're going to say or if they're going to give you an answer was great on-the-ground training for having a lot of questions ready for an interview. So after school for me, then I tried to play in the NFL, tried to play professional football, and had about a 3-year gap where I was doing that in various levels. And it was about halfway into my second year of trying to do that, where I had just gone to Canadian football training camp after getting cut from an NFL offseason program, and then was playing in a minor league in Brooklyn, where I was living in a Holiday Inn Express and riding the bus to Coney Island. It was not a glamorous existence. But at that time, I was like, all right, I'm in New York City. I have some contacts, by nature of my dad here. Why don't I hit some of them up and see if there's something to do? And, slowly but surely started going in on my free weekends and doing radio hits in New York at the local station there. And, really starting to see if, all right, I could take this appetite that I had had, some of the things that I had done, and turn this in the actual ability to go and do the job. And so finally, the next year in 2015, got cut from one last training camp in New Orleans. And, from there is where my journey is a little bit unique compared to some of yours is, I'm always pretty candid about the nepotism angle of this. I had a dad with a very famous last name in a place like ESPN that was able to help me out. And, that started with weekend radio at ESPN. I did a fantasy football radio show 6 to 10 a.m. on Sunday mornings. Had never played fantasy football in my life, but when they asked, I lied and said I loved fantasy, and then proceeded to buy every fantasy football book, magazine, piece of information I could get my hands on, and by that Sunday, be ready to go and be ready to learn. And so, all that is to say, I knew I wanted to do this for a long time. I had grown up around it in a very specific way, but getting to really, I think, get to Notre Dame and see how, all right, through my own experience now with it, getting to tell the story of our team, getting to take people around a campus that so many people are interested in, a team that so many people were interested in, really reinforced for me why I wanted to do this. And I think why I still want to do this, which is, quite honestly, to tell the story of athletes in college whose situation I know and am familiar with, a life that I lived and one that I appreciate and have a lot of respect for. But then also just to teach people about a game that I really enjoy and to have fun while doing it. So all of that kind of really I knew earlier than that, but really came to a head when I was in school at Notre Dame.
And when you were doing that, when you were still in school, when you were kind of giving the behind the scenes, you had to be one of the first ones to really embrace that and kind of, pull the curtain back and show people what was going on behind the scenes, how players get prepped for a game, things like that. Were you surprised once you started putting this content out? Were you surprised at the reaction that you got? Like, oh my word, we've got something here. People are interested in this.
Yeah, completely. We didn't know back then. It was so much trial and error. We didn't have and God, I'm going to date myself here. I'm sorry for doing this, but like we didn't yet have the ability to like put everything online via phone. Like we had a flip cam that we were going around the building with and just kind of tape it up onto the walls. We had something we do in our locker room called Trick Shot Monday that wound up, ended up as number 3 on the Sports Center top 10. It was a dumb game we played between meetings on Mondays after game weekends, but to your point, fans loved it. They ate it up. We heard from people all the time. People ended up sending us their own videos that they'd make of themselves doing it. And so, yeah, it was one of the first times where you got that immediate feedback because so much of this job, you do from inside a studio, podcasting, you do it from home. There's not always that immediate feedback, but you learned pretty quickly with this that, oh, okay, this is something that people wanted. And it was kind of the lesson of something that I had reinforced by a lot of people, what they told me later on. But it was, while you're doing the thing is when you're most valuable. Like while you're a Notre Dame student athlete or a Notre Dame student, you have access to a place that people love and are ravenous about. And you've got a lived experience that 99% of the population doesn't have. And so that was one of the ways where it was like, oh yeah, people really dig this. And if you do it right, you've got a chance to storytell something pretty valuable at a time where, you have all that access to it.
You mentioned jumping on Twitter early, X. You're still very, very involved on Twitter. You tweet about football, you tweet about life, you tweet about games, you tweet about food. I mean, you're very, very active in that. When did it come? Of course, now we talk about the Mannings and the Kelseys and all this stuff, but where did all of a sudden we as fans decide that, hey, this is interesting, this is fun? Is it us as fans kind of accepting what you all doing, or is it content creators like you that are really tapping in to things that may not be sports, but things that we're interested in? Kind of going back to, were you surprised at the reaction that you got? I mean, it's fascinating, even though when you're not even talking about football, and now you're talking about football a lot with the draft coming up. But is this something that you just tapped into, like, oh, people are interested in more things than football, and so let me give you some of my ideas?
Yeah, no, that one I can point squarely to my dad. And again, like I won't toot his horn too much when he's around, but like in terms of player-led media, in terms of, incorporating life into that, like he really was at the forefront of a lot of that for former athletes. The amount of people I've seen, like former pros that have come up to him and said they figured out they could and wanted to do this by watching him is pretty staggering. So I try not to lose sight that I was pretty fortunate to learn from him. But that was our whole life, was yeah, they were a sports talk morning show, but and I think this is pretty important when it gets into the realm of podcasting because I always think you kind of have a choice to make in how you want to do content. But long form media, which podcasting falls under, social media, which is kind of living and breathing, and certainly radio, where my dad cut his teeth, where I cut his teeth, is people are spending a lot of time with you, and parasocial relationships are huge, whether it's online or anywhere else. People want to feel like they know you, and so you've got a chance to let them in on that stuff. The fun thing I've always found about the internet is if you've got an interest, you can shout into the void and someone's always going to shout back. And if you do it consistently enough for long enough, that's how you build a community. And that's really like at the core of this, like for podcasting, for radio, for anything else. And the best forms of it that I've seen and the forms I enjoy being a part of the most, it's about creating community. That's what sports is at its core, is a bunch of people with a shared interest, shared rituals, language that they communicate with each other with. And you can build that in your own little like creative universe, but that does require some give and take. And people do have to feel like they know you. And so, yeah, it was fun to get the opportunity to share, interest in music, interest in content outside of sports. And, I've watched friends of mine build that into successful careers. Mina Kimes is one of the best NFL analysts ESPN has. And basically of her own free will, because she liked it so much, launched a reality television show podcast under ESPN's umbrella, under Omaha Productions umbrella, that now does incredibly well. So you'd be amazed to find out how often, other people's interests match your own. And while it might not be something that you necessarily have background in, like I certainly have never been on reality television, and neither is she, although she does a bunch of celebrity stuff now. Like, you, by nature of the tools that you have to cover this job, can kind of apply that lens to almost anything you're passionate about once you do it for long enough. And that makes it pretty fun. So being giving of yourself is a really good way to, connect on a different level with your audience, no matter the platform.
I mentioned that you are talking a lot about the draft right now. You have the Echoes podcast and you focus on Notre Dame players coming up in the draft and, of course, during the whole season. Let's go through putting together a podcast. How do you prepare for one of your podcasts on the Echoes? What do you do? What kind of research do you do? How do you line up your guests? What do you do to prepare for that podcast?
Yeah. So, I mentioned a lot of this is living and breathing. Like, the beauty of this is there are not defined 9 to 5 hours. The curse of it is there are not defined 9 to 5 hours. So, for us, it's a 3-person group. Me, Jessica Smetana is my co-host, and our producer, Matt, who are basically always in communication about this. So we've got Google Doc that's kind of the home base for, hey, if you've got topics you're interested, you throw that in. We've got a tab for that. We'll kind of collect a bunch of those. We can all go through and make notes. And we record on Mondays to put the podcast out on Tuesday. So, by the time we hit the weekend, we're usually trying to whittle those down to, all right, what are the things that are breaking, pressing? Did Marcus Freeman have a press conference? Did something happened over the weekend in sports on the field, on the court, anywhere else that we want to really get to. And then we kind of use that to shape the rundown of how we want to do this, because, while podcasting doesn't technically have, breaks in the traditional sense of like radio where you're dealing with hard outs, or TV where you're dealing with a hard break, like you got ad breaks, you got ways that you want to structure it still so that it paces well and sounds good. So we start to do that on Sunday night so that we can roll into Monday morning. As far as guests, that'll usually be a conversation where, in the off season right now, we can be a little bit more loose with it. We wanted to always make sure we were a podcast first and foremost that could thrive on our own, but we want to supplement guests where they can be helpful. We just reached out to, the first place you'd go to is reach out to a network of people that you've built up. I think people always like to hear relationships that are genuine on air. And so Jordan Cornett's a guy I've known for years, former Notre Dame basketball player, plenty going on with the men's program as they get ready for the portal season right now. So we wanted to have him on to talk State of the Union. So reach out to that, try and do that a week in advance so we can make sure we accommodate their time if we need to. And then, get to showtime on Monday morning to release Tuesday, and make sure that we're there each and every week when we say we're going to be there, at the time we say we're going to be there, and doing the job the right way. So it's not super rigid, which is, I think, the beauty of podcasting, but still requires some good organization if you're going to want to try and actually go and do it well.
And I think the most important thing out of all that is consistency. You're going to be there every
Yeah.
week, every week. You can't just put up a podcast today and then not come back for another 6 weeks. People need to know that you're going to be there and they want to wait for your content. So consistency is just so important. So when you are done with a recording, what makes you sit back and go, that was a great podcast? What makes a good podcast in your mind?
When you, so I think in general, the podcasts that I enjoy the most are the ones where we treat the rundown as something with tent poles and not a teleprompter, if that makes sense. Like sometimes you can overproduce a podcast and you have too much, information that you want to get in, too much written down, be too beholden to the things that you had an idea of. And I think, like any other form of content, it's all right, you use that to inform. I go in with enough information about everything I'm going to talk about. I always think about this. It's similarly in terms of like broadcasting a college football game or calling a game. Like you work all week to have enough information at your arsenal so that when things happen, you've got the information that you need in the background that you've studied to be able to speak on that in a way that's informative and makes sense. It's the same for this. I want to have all the information I need ready to go so that I can just make this a conversation with my friend. I work with Bomani Jones, who does, a very successful podcast in the right time, was an ESPN pundit for years, among other things. And I did a show with him. I filled in on a show he did with Pablo Torre called High Noon. And I had never done the show before. And we're sitting there before, and it's me and Bo, and he's like, hey, he's like, we're just gonna flip on the microphones and talk. Like, I'll get us in and out of break. Just flip on the microphones and let's have a conversation. And that always stuck with me because my favorite podcasts are the one where it just turns into a conversation where me and Jess come in and we've got a couple of things that we know we want to hit. We're both passionate about it. I think that always is important. Like people can tell when you care and when you don't. And when you care, man, it makes for much more captivating content. I'll listen to someone talk about basket weaving if they care enough about it to take me into the parts of it that I don't know or care about. But, having two people that are knowledgeable on the subject that can just go and riff and do understand and trust each other, like those are the ones where I look back and I was like, all right, we didn't get to everything we want, which is the number one telltale sign of a good show. If you walk out with stuff in the hopper, 9 out of 10 times you did it the right way. And so those are always the fun ones for me where, yeah, we go in with a plan and then we just, go and trust each other and listen, which, you mentioned consistency as the hallmark of this. Like I've heard so many of my favorite podcasters talk about that over the years. Like there is nothing that will put the distance between you and the other people you are, you're not really competing against. There's enough room for everybody, but other competitors in the space than just being there over and over again. Like I always think of it as a hammer and a chisel. Like you got to be willing to just go hammer and chisel on that stone for a long time until the picture comes into focus later on. But the other thing beyond that, and it sounds so stupid and basic, but I promise when you get into doing the job, it becomes the easiest thing to forget is just straight up listening. Like you're going to be looking at your rundown, trying to figure out where you're going to go next. If you're doing TV, a producer is going to be in your ear. If you're in the middle of a game, something else is going to be going on. But just like base level listening to the person you're interviewing, your co-host on something is 9 out of 10 times going to produce a better conversation than you guys could have ever planned for. When all of a sudden you see the string of a conversation or something that interests you and you just tug it a little bit, it is to me the difference between people that go out there and do fine and the people that become actually great at all of this stuff. So those are my favorite ones for sure.
And then how do you promote it? As I mentioned, you're so involved on social media. Do you depend on social media to promote the podcast?
I think it helps. I think modern social media right now is a bit more complicated because of how messed up a lot of the algorithms have gotten, especially on Twitter. But we do a mix of that. Like we're on, we have accounts on every site. Like you want to be where everyone is. So our show account has a Twitter and Instagram, a TikTok, like all the things that you kind of need to go and do that. we've got, promotions that run elsewhere. The podcast that I work on also is, under the same umbrella as like WSBT. So I know they'll do promotions there for that. We're actually going to do some meetings about that when I'm in town around the spring game. But in my mind, Twitter, social media, a lot of that is a helpful promotional tool, but also a difficult one because I know in a lot of people's experience that I've talked to, it at times does not have the crossover effect that you desire. Like people that take your content in on Twitter aren't always going to be willing to migrate over to the actual podcast or migrate over to YouTube, but they're there to get like a sample of you in my mind. Like you're bringing out the sample platter before a wedding at a cocktail hour and just giving them little bits of that. And honestly, as much as anything else too, Twitter, as far as promotion, is really good for just having like your reel out at a place where our bosses all look. And while social media is not real life, a lot of the people that will employ you one day will treat it as such. They see the effect on there. They see things go viral and get really excited about it. So it's a good place to have it out there because it ends up being your walking, talking, living, breathing resume, and can still be a good way to, at the very least, get people familiar with what you're doing. I have talked to so many people over the years on various podcasts who are like, no, I've never actually listened to your show, but I love the stuff that hits social media. So there's an awareness of it there. And then eventually, if it gets a few extra people back to the podcast itself, that's great.
All right, I know we've got questions, so if anybody has a question, jump on in for Mike.
I got a
Yeah, go ahead,
question.
Isaiah.
Good to see you. My question is, when you form those relationships, especially with a lot of people in the community, whether it's coaches or people on the team, when those tough situations come about where maybe they're not being as successful as usual, how do you go about delivering that message with also being respectful to your relationship with them?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and again, I hate to be a broken record, but it's one of the first things my dad also taught me because I was a guy that I didn't make it in the NFL, went to 3 training camps, kept getting cut, and all of a sudden my first job is potentially criticizing guys that are actually doing that in the NFL. So you have like a weird identity crisis, but the thing I always fall back on is you are criticizing the decision, not the decision maker. Like you are criticizing a moment, not the person who's involved in that. There's a way to do that. And, I think so many of you that have experience with athletics, you know how that feels on the other side. And so I always encourage people to make it deeply personal. Like whenever I am going to go to air with a take on a coach, a player, something like that, I always think, all right, would I be comfortable saying this in front of them? Because at some point I might have to. I've had coaches call me on takes. I've gotten messages from coaches when I've said something about one of their players. Like, again, every coach tells you they're not listening to all this stuff. They do. Most of them do, and it's understandable. But the feedback is real in that case. And you want to make sure that whatever you're going to go out there and claim is grounded in stuff that you can point to, evidence that you can defend, and still done in a way that's respectful. You can be passionate about something without being disrespectful, I think. And a lot of that comes back to focusing more on, hey, this was a bad decision, not this guy's a bum. This is a bad person. This person is X, Y, or Z. That's where I think you get into trouble, and we see a lot of people in the industry get in trouble.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
All right, any other questions we have real quick?
Oh,
I have a question.
Oh, sure.
Thanks for joining us today, Mike. I'm Cooper. My question, you talked a little bit about feedback. So can you just talk about like when you receive feedback, like not necessarily from like fans, but like a producer aspect of that, like how you take, because sometimes like when we get like really attached to an idea, it's kind of hard to move ourselves away from that. Could you just talk about like that process, how you walk through feedback, how like they're just trying to help you, even though it can be tough to hear?
Yeah, that is, I mean, God, if there is any bit of advice I can give you is like that is a precious thing. Like you can get it now and that's great. When you start doing this for real, feedback really hard to come by, and you've got to hunt that. You've got to find people that you trust enough and who trust you enough to give you feedback like that. So whether it's listening sessions, I've had people watch the games I've called before and go over that. Like you have to approach it from an athlete's mindset. You go in and you turn on tape after a game, after a practice, and there's a right way and a wrong way to do things. And we got a goal that we're trying to get to. And so you got to kind of put your ego away for a second. You might not always agree with it. Like I've gotten plenty of feedback where I'm like, hey, I understand where that comes from, but it's just not how I feel comfortable doing this. But there's a lot of instances where it can and will make you better. Like it's as weird as this is to say out loud, I've been doing this for a decade now. And I still understand that I am a baby in this industry relative to a lot of people that have been around there. And there's a ton of stuff that I could do better. And so feedback really becomes a gift after a while because it's so hard to come by. And, I think the other part of it too is you realize pretty quickly in doing this that you're just one part of the machine. Like if you're the voice going out over air, if you're a writer getting a piece out, like you have editors, you have other contributors, you have people that are on there. And so you've got to be humble enough to understand that the good idea is not always going to be yours. Like in doing a podcast and doing a radio show, I try and always make sure early on in doing a show that I'm getting other people's ideas on air because you want an environment where people feel like, all right, if I offer something up, not only is it not going to get shouted down, not only is my feedback not going to be turned away, but it's going to be internalized and used really quickly because then that creates a space where people feel comfortable doing that. Giving the feedback on, hey, here's a way this segment could be a little bit better. Here's something I noticed, a verbal crutch that you're leaning on here. And so if people feel like they can do that for you, you get a lot more of that. But it just, again, it's tough because we all have egos, but you got to understand when to put that away. And, especially again, that's a relationship thing. That's buy-in. If you work with someone long enough to get that, you trust, hey, they're not saying this because they think you're bad at your job or it's an indication you're going to get fired. They're saying this because they believe in you enough to want you to be as good as you can possibly be.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else want to jump in?
Mike, good to see you. I just have a quick question. Thank you for being with us today.
Sure.
I had a question about just the growth of your podcast and kind of like elevating it to a new level. So obviously like you had like new ideas when you were a student, but then kind of using like the background you already had, I'm sure really helped elevate your podcast. But how do you continue to grow it? And what are some like strategies you use, especially with social media and the algorithm, kind of making sure that you have the right audience and then growing like your following?
Yeah, I think it's, twofold. Like growing podcasts is always really interesting and difficult. Like the only tried and true way to do it is to do more of them. So if we really wanted to make a big leap, we'd add a second day to that. And all of a sudden that doubles everything in a way that's pretty easy to replicate. But I think the other way that you can continue to do that is, using the access that you have. Like we're fortunate that teams on Notre Dame's campus, the, sports information directors that we know have been good to us about getting guests. Katie Lonergan over at football was really good during the fall on, coming to us every week. And we kind of chat with her about, hey, is there someone that could be available for us coming off the game this weekend and a chance to do that? Because, that's a huge driver in traffic when you can get guests that people care about at a time when they care about them. So I'd say that. And then, social media wise, I think one of the things that we've done really well is, and this is a credit to, our producer, Matt, and the larger network that surrounds our podcast is they have a really good plan for when they're going to release content on social. So our podcast only releases one day a week on Tuesday, but you're pretty much getting content for the rest of the week coming off that on social. That always does point back to that initial source, but it's great for that and just kind of keeping it top of mind, especially for us, going into events just like we had for March Madness and following the women's team around. Like we had content about that going into the weekend when the games are starting to get played during football season. We want takes that'll all of a sudden, hey, come out on a Tuesday, but get rehashed on Thursday and Friday going into Saturday and going into the weekend. And so I think that, and one of the other things that I always see is pretty useful too. And this can be this can be if you've got a producer who's in charge of managing social is, you chase big events. So I always thought my earliest social media strategy was I want to be tweeting through live events. Everyone's everywhere watching the same thing at once. It's so rare in modern content. Like we don't get a lot of that in TV watching post Game of Thrones. And so you get like this opportunity to be here watching the game with everybody else and have your voice heard. And so if you can do that, and also, hey, we had a clip that called this exact moment in the game. We said, hey, they were going to have to go deep to, beat Boston College, and they hit Malachi Fields for a big play down the field. Like, let's get that clip back in circulation. Let's get the relevant topic there moving and try and see if it can get swept up in things. Is I think from like the grassroots side of it there and like social media side of it, always a pretty safe bet, like to be on during the big events where everyone else is on.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Any other questions? Hannah, you have been, Daisy,
Is it
I'll go to
Marguerite?
you, and then we'll talk. Yeah, we'll talk with Hannah here in a little bit because she's been a subject a time or two on Mike's podcast. So, Daisy, go ahead.
Yeah, so you mentioned earlier that you try to like structure your podcast to have those breaks that radio and television has, but isn't necessarily built in. Could you talk a little bit more about like some of your strategies for doing that?
Yeah, a lot of that, like quite honestly, the base level is just building in for ad breaks. Like I'm sure if you've listened to a podcast, you've seen, sometimes ads can, if you're not going to do that, a lot of times, especially if it's a third party that controls some of the ad placement, they'll just decide where they're going to put it, and sometimes it can make for some very awkward moments. I think there's like a whole stretch of the Bill Simmons fan Reddit that's dedicated to some fun moments like that. So a lot of times it's just so that there is a clean spot like that for them to put ad breaks there. But I also think from a practical standpoint for us, it does kind of help you pace out how you're going to talk about a subject. If we go in saying, all right, hey, we had an actual game that got played this weekend that we want to talk about, and maybe one other thing, Notre Dame's pro day happened, and we want to get to that. We're going to say, all right, we got about 20 minutes for that. And so it keeps you honest in the conversation, because I do think one of the tendencies of podcasting can be like it'll drag because there's no time limit. You think it's a good excuse to just go out here and talk for as long as you want. And, unless you're Joe Rogan or one of the people that's been there forever where people will listen to a 2 hour and 45-minute podcast you do. For everyone else, I still do think pacing and timing are important, and that, at least in my experience, kind of helps drive some of that. But just practically speaking, it's just so they have a place to put advertisements.
All right, I was going to call out Hannah because Hannah has been a subject on your podcast more than once. Hannah, you have any questions for Mike while he's here?
Yeah, I can ask you a question. Um, okay, so when you got into broadcasting, what was the hardest part of your identity to like let go of, like from your previous career, until like becoming like a broadcaster, not doing that? What was the hardest thing to like let go of?
Yeah, I think to Isaiah's point from before, it was really the fear of offending people that had been in my position. And you see it a lot, right? With athletes that make the transition to media almost right away, is there's a sense that like, oh, now you're one of them. Like you'll see current players go at them all the time. I see it happen a ton in a lot of the NBA shows where you'll get a lot of that where, guys who are current players think that guys that were former players or women that were former players are violating the trust of the locker room, or these things that you used to be part of the world that you operated in where you're trying to protect that team and that thing that you're building. And so, again, I do think it just goes back to you've got to, find the way that you're comfortable talking about that, because I still think, stories from the locker room, when appropriate, are really helpful color and insight. Having to be critical of athletes and situations is an important part of the job, but you can still do it in a way that is not going to rub people the wrong way. But, it was tough. Like I had buddies of mine that were playing in the NFL who, once I started doing the media thing full time, you'd get around them and they'd be talking to you and they're like, is this off the record? Like, how does this work? Like people start to wonder if everything is just content. And so kind of assuring the people in your life that, not everything that we say and talk about is going to make air, the same way that you would never, take everything that's gone on in the locker room and turn that into the next subject of your next interview or anything like that. So I think it's, really the anxiety around that was the toughest part of the transition by far. And, I think it's something that, because so many of, athletes are doing media while they're still players, I think is becoming a little bit easier and easier of a process.
All right, thanks. Time for another question or two, and then we're going to talk golf.
Yeah, Mike, thanks so much for the time. It's great to connect again here. And I was curious, we talk a lot about student athletes, and of course, you were with football, but for us non-student athletes who are playing, intramural soccer right now, but no, just curious to see what, you think us college students should be doing, and then maybe anything, say if you were a student right now not playing football that you would be doing to set yourself up. And I know you kind of touched upon this, but curious to hear that point of view.
Yeah, anyone I've been fortunate enough to talk to, among your classmates about this, like I always say, like hunt reps. Like you got a great opportunity now. There's so much more infrastructure around Notre Dame than when I was a student that you've got great opportunities to do this. I know you guys have a radio station. And this could be antiquated at this point. Like I think podcasting solves for some of the same stuff, but I don't know. There's part of me that will always say that doing live radio will make everything else you do in sports media feel easy. Like if you want to get better as a studio host, a game analyst, a podcaster, anything like that, go do live radio, like, and go do it consistently. But if you can't do that, like, get reps on a podcast, get reps on somebody else's podcast, find a mic consistently. And like we said before, try and hunt feedback. If you've got people you're doing it with, listen for the other and, help critique the other or build them up there. But it really is like, the 10,000 hours rule has, some validity to it and some not, but you really like, you're only going to get better. I started getting the biggest boom for me in this industry was when I moved just off weekends. I got put on the overnight. So it was 4 to 6 a.m. Eastern. I was leading into the national drive time show. I don't even think my bosses listened to the show, quite honestly. I think they barely knew it existed, but I was in front of a microphone 5 days a week and I got to make mistakes every single day. And so hunt those opportunities as best you can to try and do that would probably be the biggest bit of advice while you've got the, time and space on campus to do that. And, you're at a place where, no matter what your interest is, if it's live events, if it's covering it from studio, I've seen you guys have the setup, like there seems to be a place to go explore that. And so just use as much of your time as you can there and, reach out to people like me, other alumni, like, Notre Dame, I always believe is underrepresented in this space. And I go around into enough locker rooms and press boxes and see, Syracuse grads and Northwestern grads all over the place. Like, we're all happy to help, the next generation of broadcasters try and do this as best as possible. And, while you're on campus right now, like, Isaiah, I know is getting ready to go do work over at WNDU. Like, you guys got NBC there that does the broadcast for all the sports. Like, use those connections. I saw Tarico was on campus. Like, you want to, get in front of all these people, be respectful of their time, but also make sure that, you're starting to get your name out there and get introduced to as many people as possible, because I'm a firm believer in the strength of weak ties. Like I think this last fall I worked for, 5 different employers technically. And I think 3 or 4 of them were people that had been producers for me at ESPN or been, my boss in some capacity there. Like you never know where opportunity is going to come from. And so the more people that you can get to know and then, maintain those relationships without an expectation that something's going to come. I also think that's the hardest part is a lot of people will do it when something's coming up. But if you just, this is kind of a person that and you find some common interest. And so every time that pops up, you can send them a note about that. I think that goes a long way in the kind of networking that you can start to do now that will have a real impact at some point, or maybe it won't, but that's kind of the gamble you got to take.
Thank you. And if you don't mind, just a follow-up question. I know you do color, of course, as well. And when you're in the booth, what do you like to see out of a play-by-play guy to help you out doing color?
Yeah, I think for me, the best play-by-play guys that I've been around do a really good job of drawing the lines around the broadcast. Like in my mind, it's my job to color inside that, but the play-by-play announcer's got to draw the outline of the picture first for us. So at the beginning of a broadcast, what are the stakes? What's the background? Where did these teams come from? Like a lot of that exposition, I think, is traditionally the job of the play-by-play, and the best ones that I've been around do that really well. And then, it's having a good respect for each other's time. It's my job to make sure I'm done talking by the time we get to the snack so that he can set up the play and do all of that. but in equal parts, it's his job not only to, once the play is done, give me some time and room there, but to also work off what he's interested on. And honestly, the best ones ask follow-up questions too. Like at times as an analyst, you can get a little far down the rabbit hole because you know your sport really well and you want to sound really smart. And so the best play-by-play guys will kind of pull back on the reins and be like, all right, if I say some convoluted offensive line term, he's going to be the one that pumps the brake and says, hey, for people at home, what does that mean? What goes into that? And so I think creating the setting, the sense of place, and the stakes of the game, as well as being kind of the voice of the fan at home, of making sure that we point everything in our broadcast towards those people that are listening that might not have the same expertise, I do think becomes part of the, what makes a really good play-by-play.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike.
Yep.
Another question out there?
Hi, Mike. I had a question about how you best prepare the people you're interviewing for their interview. So obviously there are some things that you want a more like natural reaction to, but do you often give them like kind of a basic rundown of maybe some general questions that you'll ask so that they can have like a well-formulated answer and don't have like really long pauses or a response that they're not ready for, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I think it's kind of different depending on what kind of guest you're going to have, right? If you're having a guest who's a big name, but might not be as familiar with your subject matter, a lot of times, people in their circle will ask for questions beforehand. When we've had, commissioners, Charlie Baker from the NCAA, like they like to have a rundown of some of the things there because there's a lot of minutia in them. They involve a lot of really specific details. Injury experts can be the same, where I've worked with them, they want to know who are we talking about so they can kind of be prepped on a lot of that stuff. Other times, if it's, an analyst that you have coming on, and especially if it's like a friend of yours, I'll reach out and let them know, hey, this is the specific thing that we want to talk about, just so that you're kind of prepared for that. And then there's some cases where, like, if you're doing it on radio, if you're doing it something that's a little bit more, fluid, and especially if it's someone who knows their stuff, you can just kind of read and react. Like I'll go into a lot of radio interviews. If you're talking college football after a weekend that just happened, you're pretty much prepped for everything because you're ready to go. But B, you also kind of know how to get yourself to a place that's comfortable if the question hits something you don't know. So I'd say you kind of tailor it to what you think each guest needs. And in a lot of cases, the ones that do need the most prep are going to let you know that far before you have to reach out and give them the prep that they need.
Awesome. Thank you. And then I had one more question too.
Yep.
I know that you said you posted your podcast on Tuesday and record on Mondays. Is there a certain reason, like within your analytics, that you decided to make that decision? Or even because I know different sports during the seasons like are on different days, what made you choose Tuesday, I guess, for your podcast to go up?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. Is one, at a base level, it was when we could both be in one spot consistently enough. Like, listening to the feedback of, all the different tools and metrics we have to measure is super important. But going back to the, be what you are when you say you're going to be there, when, or, wherever you are and need to be, like that consistency you've got to build at a nuts and bolts level. It's got to be something that you can replicate consistently over time. So we started doing this podcast going into the season. I was going to be traveling back from games every Sunday, so doing it in the immediacy after the game was kind of going to be out. And then Monday tends to be a day kind of dominated by the NFL. And so we thought Tuesday could kind of be a sweet spot where, all right, people are catching their breath coming off that. We get the added bonus at that point in the week of being able to simultaneously react to what's happened from the weekend before. And in some cases, when the timing is right, look forward to stuff that's coming up and kind of have it serve both masters in that case. So that was a lot of it to us, really, was more the practicality of, all right, here's a day that we can both do this on so that we can build that kind of consistency that creates expectation, that creates the audience and community.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Any more? Any more? All right, Mike, as promised, I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about your golf outing coming out. As you mentioned, you're going to be back on campus for the Blue Gold game. And this is, if I remember correctly, this is the fifth the fifth annual
Yep.
golf outing. And I want to bring it up for two reasons. A, because if you need volunteers, I have a group of students who might want the opportunity to meet some of the folks that you're going to be having there as your guests. But the second thing I wanted you to talk about, as well as the part of fundraising and the foundation, is that so many of even those who are in the class today, so many of the student athletes already have a charitable component, already are in that nonprofit field, and they're already giving back. And this is something that, of course, as we grow older, we see the importance of doing that, giving back to the community. And your golf outing does help the South Bend community, supports the South Bend community and its charities. So go over, first of all, why you got involved, why the Golic Family Foundation got involved in fundraising, especially giving back to South Bend, giving back to the Notre Dame community.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. First and foremost, I guess it's twofold. Is one, South Bend's basically been my family's home since the '80s. Like, again, dad and both his brothers went there. Mom went to St. Mary's. Her sister went to St. Mary's. Me and all my siblings were Notre Dame student athletes. So it's just a place where we spent so much time. My parents have a house and live out there, at least half the year. And so that was always the place that no matter where we moved around in the rest of my life, that was kind of the place where we felt home. And then you guys all know this. I mean, living in Notre Dame, there is at times a complicated relationship with South Bend, but it's also the place where school is. And at times it can feel like campus is a little bit separate from that. But, you guys, I'm sure, have gotten the chance to work with a lot of charities, like a lot of the ones that we work with in the foundation, and we work with 5 of them. But like the Logan Center was where, on the football team, people used to go and do, community service early in the week when I was a player. And so kind of looking back now and, just going out and seeing, at ESPN, they have the V Foundation auction every year, and they raise so much money and all that. And they're all worthy causes, but we thought, all right, on a local level, how much farther could those dollars go? Even if we're not raising millions of dollars, helping out people that are doing very specific work in the community. And, for us, we wanted to focus on things that mattered to us, cultivate food rescue and food insecurity. We're a big dog family, the Humane Society of St. Joseph's County. We already mentioned the Logan Center, the Ronald McDonald House of Michiana. Like, I know some of you guys have gone over there and done stuff before over near the hospital. Like, what a humbling experience to go and be around a lot of that. So I think getting to see the work that they had been doing locally in a place that does at times feel forgotten. People say South Bend, but think of Notre Dame so much nationally when they talk about this place. We've all lived it. And if you've gone to school at Notre Dame, it means that you've experienced South Bend in all of its many forms. So we thought it was a cool opportunity to do something different and kind of extend that olive branch back across campus to the South Bend community and bring back a lot of people that we love. Like a part of this, especially, she mentioned going into year 5, we're doing it in the spring game weekend, which is different. We've done it in the summer, but this year we got the chance to, partner with the Notre Dame Football Legacy Weekend and involve more of the football alumni, more of other people coming back to campus, because I do think that fellowship's also a part of it. Like, I'm sure, as everyone tells you, like, you guys are going to miss the hell out of being able to walk down the hall or walk down the street and see your best friends. Like, life changes quick. People start having kids, families, and jobs, and it's harder and harder to get together. And, stuff slips through the cracks. Like, we've lost a lot of teammates from my team way too soon, and it never gets easier. And so you relish the opportunities to get with everyone in person and fill everyone's cup and do all of that, and to do that in a setting that also helps give back to a place that in different ways has supported so many of us over the years, felt like the right thing to do.
I remember one of the students that I had last year in the class, and we were talking about Notre Dame swag and Notre Dame gear and how you find, great Notre Dame stuff to wear. And she said, well, I'm graduating this year, so I'll never wear it again. I go, no. That's not the way it works.
No, I can assure you guys.
Yeah, you will wear it when you mow the grass. You will wear it when you're out for a jog on Saturday morning. You will wear your Notre Dame stuff after you graduate.
Yeah, I can promise you, you find out very quickly. Notre Dame is not like a lot of other places. Like I talk, when I started going and trying to play pro ball or just meet people through work, and they talk about their alma maters, and I talk about some of them haven't been back in a decade. Like most of my circle of former teammates, former classmates, like most of them can't go 6 months without finding a reason to go back to campus, let alone wear it proudly. I'm also out here in Los Angeles, so I love making the USC fans mad by flaunting this everywhere, but. It no, that community aspect of it and that part of the identity will never leave you. And everyone's experience is different. I don't expect Notre Dame to be sunshines and rainbows for everybody. Like I had a unique family tie to that. I had teammates who had a really difficult time on campus, but the one thing that I do think is different is the sense of community, whether it's belonging to your dorm on campus, your team there, like you got to take care of the people that take care of you because it can get lonely real quick when you leave. And this is just another one of those ways again where we can bring our people back into the fold and we can kind of relive some of the things that we've enjoyed most about the relationship over the years and getting to do all that.
So my next question, do you still need volunteers?
Oh, did I lose you?
Well, are you back?
Gotcha.
Am I back? Are you back?
I got you.
All right. Just asking, you still need volunteers?
Yeah, yes, we may. I'm doing a lot of those meetings right now, and so we would always welcome volunteers. Our event coordinator does a phenomenal job with her team, but we can always use more hands, and we'll be around for most of the weekend too. Like I said, there's a lot of people coming back into the fold around this weekend. A lot of people that'll be around, so. I've talked to some of you in this class already separately who have reached out and done a good job of all that, but. I'll be around on campus the whole week leading up. If there's, anything I can do for anybody in the meantime there, in addition to maybe, needing some volunteer help on the front for the golf tournament, happy to do so. Like I said, if I can ever be helpful to any of you guys, and in this instance, if that help might be reciprocated, would certainly love to and have the time to do it. So.
Yeah, I've got her. Is it Mara? I've got her email address.
Yes.
And I'll make sure that I post in case anybody's interested in doing a little volunteer work and meeting some people who might help build your network, which is something I preach all the time, trying to build that network. So you've touched on it before, but I always ask our guests at the end, kind of wrap it up. What is your advice to students who frankly want to do what you do, are following in your path?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it you've heard me say already, like be consistent. That's not only in putting out content, but, apply the same stuff that you have in, college and athletics to that. Be the one that's on time. I promise people notice, and that is not the norm from a lot of people in this industry is being on time, showing up, being accountable to all that stuff. Like I already said, hunt feedback relentlessly, but above all else, and again, most of this advice sounds really base level because it is, listen and be a good teammate. Like I can't tell you the amount of opportunities that have already come up for me in my career because people left with a good taste in their mouth when they worked with you. Like, you are one part of every broadcast, every podcast, every show that you'll be. Don't think you're the only part, especially if you're the one whose voice is going out over air. You might be the face of it, but a lot of other people are building their livelihood off this. And you have a chance to, be a leader in whatever group that you're a part of there, whether, you're the one on air and you look around and you're making more money than everyone else in this broadcast on the broadcast. Hey, congrats. That means it's your responsibility to lead and make this thing look good and to make sure everyone else feels like they've got a place in this, feels like their work is valued. Like, don't be the one that's difficult. Don't be the one that's ego gets bruised easily. Like, show up, show people you're willing to work hard, and make sure that you make everyone feel like a valued member of this. Be the leader on the team that you're a part of there, and be a good teammate as you go. And I promise, between that and the consistency portion of it, you're going to be light years ahead of 90% of the people that you're going up against for jobs that you're working with around there, and it'll make all the difference in the world. So, consistency, feedback, and being a good teammate, I think, are things that never really go out of style. And as you hone the skills and the rest of this stuff will ultimately be the backbone of a successful career that you build.
Yeah, it is a small business, and once you have a reputation, it's hard to change that. So, get off on the right foot, and it will pay dividends down the road. That's for sure. Mike, we appreciate your time this morning. Some great advice and some great background on how our students and student athletes can, hopefully be able to do the same that you have. As I mentioned to you in the email, I always loved working with your dad. Your dad was always, down the hall working radio, and I was over in the studio. But we would amazingly, we would run into each other in the makeup room, which is a little humbling right there. But yeah, you have some great conversations with people when you're sitting there in the chair and you can't do anything in the makeup room. So I always loved working with him. Please tell him I said hello. And again, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And I know that our students got a lot out of it as well. Good luck with the golf outing, and I'll put that email up in case anybody wants to volunteer, and hopefully they'll follow up with you. Mike, take care. Thank you so much. Thank you to the students, and we'll see you in class on Monday. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.